Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are tearing into a fascinating figure today, a man whose life story is, well, it's less a traditional director's biography and more of a high-octane adventure.
Oh, absolutely. It spans collapsing empires, huge shifts in global politics, and it also contains maybe the single greatest piece of cinematic irony you could ever uncover.
Right. We are diving deep into the multifaceted, deeply contradictory world of André de Toth.
And if you're looking for that singular, unbelievable fact that really anchors this entire conversation, we have to start there. We have to start with the paradox at the heart of his legacy.
Let's do it.
André de Toth was a Hungarian-American film director who could effortlessly master everything from these, gritty westerns to taut film noir.
A real genre guy.
Exactly. Yet his enduring notoriety for most people rests almost entirely on one movie.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately, because the fact is truly mind-bending. The central achievement that defines him for so many film history buffs is that de Toth directed House of Wax.
The 1953 version.
The 1953 version. Now, if you know your 1950s cinema, you know House of Wax wasn't just a successful film.
No, not at all.
It was one of the earliest and most popular major Hollywood productions shot entirely in 3D. It basically launched the mid-century 3D craze.
And here is the colossal, almost cruel irony of it all. André de Toth had lost his left eye at an early age.
Wow.
So true stereoscopic 3D vision, the ability to perceive depth because you're merging two slightly different images in your brain, that relies entirely on having two eyes. Binocular vision.
So if you only have one eye, you are physically,
Incorrect.
Your body just can't do it. You can't see the actual stereoscopic 3D effect that was the entire selling point of the movie you directed.
You can't. You can perceive depth through other cues, right? Perspective, shadow, motion, how big something is relative to something else.
Sure, the things we learn.
But you cannot experience the visual novelty, the thing that jumps out at the audience.
You couldn't see it.
Precisely. He was the master builder of an illusion that he himself could not fully appreciate. He directed this huge spectacle, a technical stunt, frankly, that relied on dimensional trickery without being able to verify that dimension in his own experience.
That is the ultimate aha moment we're exploring today, but it's really just one thread in an incredibly complex tapestry.
It is.
Our mission today is to follow that thread all the way back to its origins. We need to unpack the source material about this director who, seemingly defied every label. We're going to cover his aristocratic, highly educated roots in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, his surprising involvement in wartime Europe, his tireless fight for independence in Hollywood.
Which is a story in itself.
Oh, yeah. And that fight forced him to become this genre-blending craftsman. And then finally, that absolutely wild personal life, which included 7 marriages and an almost fatal case of mistaken identity involving his trademark eye patch.
It's a study in self-reliance and contradiction. Here's a man who learned the rules. He literally went to law school just so he could break them.
Like suing the studio.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the very beginning, tracing his complex intellectual background in Hungary before he even dreamed of stepping onto a Hollywood set.
He was born André Antomihály Toth on May 15th, 1913, in a place called Mako. At that time, this was part of the vast and dissolving Austro-Hungarian Empire.
And the complexity of the man starts immediately with his name.
It really does.
The sources reveal his birth name in its full aristocratic form. Zazori Fakasfalvi Totfalusi Toth André Antomihály.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But what does that huge, long name tell us about his background?
It speaks volumes about the societal layers he grew up in. In Hungarian society, those multiple lengthy designations, they indicate ancient lineage, a strong sense of history, and, often an aristocratic or gentry background.
So he wasn't just a regular citizen.
No, he belonged to a historically recognized family structure. And that background, well, it afforded him access to the absolute highest levels of education.
And that education was intense. He didn't initially pursue the arts, but rather the very rigorous discipline of law.
Exactly. In the early 1930s, he earned a full law degree from the Royal Hungarian Pázmány Péter Sciences University in Budapest. We often see directors coming from varied backgrounds, but a formal degree in law is pretty significant.
Why do you think that legal foundation is so crucial to understanding the director he became? It seems like a massive detour from creative pursuits.
It gives us a framework for his independence later on. Think about what law school instills in you. Intense analytical skills, the ability to structure a complex argument, forensic attention to detail,
Right.
and a tireless focus on preparation. When he moved into film, that rigor would translate directly into his direction. He was disciplined, structured, and capable of arguing his position, or, as we'll see, litigating his contract with formidable conviction.
So his films have that tight structure.
They do. Whether it's a Western or a noir, they are always structurally tight, and I really think you can trace that right back to his legal training.
That makes a lot of sense. The discipline of the mind informs the discipline of the shot. But before he even picked up a camera, he found his first real creative passion on the stage.
Yes, his transition from law was softened by the world of theater. While he was still in college, he began writing plays and very quickly gained significant acclaim for his work.
And this wasn't just some student hobby.
This early success caught the attention of and led to a mentorship from the legendary Hungarian playwright Ferenc Molnár.
Okay, for those of us who might not be familiar with him, why is Molnár such a significant figure in this story?
Molnár was a colossal figure, a true master of European drama. Internationally, he's probably best known for plays like Lilium.
Which became the musical Carousel.
Exactly. So being mentored by Molnár meant that Toth was integrated directly into the sophisticated, narrative-driven Budapest theater scene. He was learning high drama, complex characterization, and tight scene building from a master who really understood the dynamics of audience engagement.
So he arrives in Hollywood with a law degree, a deep immersion in European theatrical narrative structure, and hands-on experience in the arts. It's a very unusual but potent mix.
And by the late 1930s, he fully transitioned into the rapidly expanding film industry.
He was all in.
By 1939, he was completely immersed in the technical side of movie making in Europe. The sources highlight his incredible versatility. I mean, he worked as a writer, assistant director, editor, and even occasionally stepped in front of the camera as an actor.
He knew how to do every job on a set.
And that's foundational to his later career. It allowed him to communicate clearly and efficiently with every single department.
He also directed 5 films in Europe, starting around 1939. And it's interesting, even these early Hungarian films found a substantial audience in the U.S., specifically within Hungarian-American communities.
So he was already building a reputation that preceded his arrival.
He was, but then, of course, the political landscape of Europe just shatters.
Right.
And this is where his biography takes that truly dark, jarring turn that very few Hollywood directors can claim.
The sources contain this shocking detail that just before the outbreak of World War II, Toth was sent by the Nazi regime to film the invasion of Poland.
Wow, let's just pause on that. This is a moment where the artistic professional is forced into the role of, what, a propagandist? Or at the very least, a documentarian for a catastrophic historical event.
It puts him in an extremely high-stakes, ethically complex situation. We're talking about a highly educated aristocrat who was filming the opening shots of a global conflict for the aggressor.
Even if he was just a technician.
Even if his primary role was just technical documenting troop movements or the action, he was, by necessity, working for the war machine.
It's a huge moral pivot from the refined world of Budapest theater. It really underscores the desperation and political pressure that was being applied to creative individuals in Central Europe during that period.
It absolutely does. The war forced impossible choices on people. However, he didn't remain involved for long. Shortly after that, he made a decisive move and landed in England. And there, he spent several years working as an assistant to a massively important figure in the British film industry, Alexander Korda.
Korda is another pivotal Hungarian émigré. What was that working relationship like, and how did it act as his final staging ground for Hollywood?
Working for Alexander Korda, who essentially ran his own mini-mogul system outside of the major Hollywood studios, was invaluable. Korda oversaw these large-scale, ambitious productions.
So Toth was exposed not just to the craft of directing, but to the whole business of film.
Exactly. High production values, international distribution. The sources show that this period really cemented his comprehensive understanding of how to run a set efficiently, manage resources, and bring a grand vision to life.
So by the time he arrives in Los Angeles in 1942, he isn't just a playwright or a local director. He's a technically savvy, multidisciplined veteran who has survived major geopolitical upheaval and worked under a major producer.
And that experience laid the perfect groundwork for a director who would come to define independence.
It allowed him to be self-sufficient.
Yes, and that self-sufficiency is what immediately put him at odds with the entrenched Hollywood system, which brings us to his path to independence.
So let's transition to his arrival. He lands in Los Angeles in 1942, and based on this impressive European resume, he quickly gets an offer.
Yeah, his credits and his experience with Corto were more than enough to land him an oral contract as a director at Columbia Pictures.
Which was, in that era, the standard career path. You get signed, you get paid, you direct the films the studio assigns you.
Right. But the very notion of being owned by a studio, even one like Columbia, seems to have clashed immediately with his DNA.
It did. And this detail is maybe the single most defining anecdote about his professional ideology, more so than even House of Wax.
What's that?
Toth ultimately extricated himself from that Columbia contract, and he did so through litigation.
He sued the studio.
He sued the studio to nullify the agreement.
Wait, let's just pause on that. In the 1940s, a director, especially a European emigre, just starting in the States, sues a major studio to avoid having a secure, steady paycheck. That's almost unheard of.
It truly is. It speaks to a profound, almost stubborn preference for autonomy. In the golden age of Hollywood, directors were factory workers. They were assigned projects constrained by genre and worked under this hierarchical power structure.
And by successfully fighting Columbia, Toth basically declared his intention to operate as an independent contractor. He wanted to choose his projects and maintain greater creative control.
Even if it meant sacrificing the security of a steady salary and guaranteed access to A-list resources.
That immediately puts him on the fringes, though. Independence means freedom, but it also means struggle. The sources note he had no A budgets early on in his career.
For the listener, what exactly does that distinction mean?
That is a critical piece of context. In classic Hollywood, an A-budget film was a prestige, picture high costs, major stars, extensive marketing, and the expectation of huge box office returns.
And Toth was working in the B picture category.
Yes. Quicker, lower-cost films often meant to run on a double bill, with less star power and much tighter schedules.
So he was forced to be exceptionally efficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the directing income from these B pictures was often not enough, he had to supplement it. He did a lot of uncredited writing assignments.
So this necessity to constantly write, edit, and direct on a shoestring honed his ability to deliver dramatic impact with minimal frills.
He became a master of economy. He focused on the story and the action, not expensive set pieces.
Before we jump into his films, let's quickly confirm his official American identity. He was naturalized in 1945.
Yes. That's when he formalized his name, adopting André Antal Mixa de Toth as his legal name, which was then simplified by the industry to the André de Toth we know today.
So it marks that shift from the complex, aristocratic European identity to the streamlined, independent American craftsman.
It does. And once he was established, he found a genre where his efficient, disciplined style could truly shine, the Western. And he credits a giant of the field for this discovery.
Right. He was introduced to the Western genre by none other than John Ford.
The man synonymous with the American West on film?
And that introduction led to Toth working predominantly in Westerns all through the 1950s.
But again, he didn't just churn out standard cowboy fare. He infused these Westerns with his earlier expertise in European drama and his, nascent love of tension.
This is the key insight into his genius as a genre director. Toth blended the sweeping landscapes and moral clarity you traditionally find in Westerns.
With the psychological complexity, the moral ambiguity, and the stark lighting of film noir, he essentially created the noir Western.
Can you give us a quick example of how that blending works in practice? How does a Western become noir?
Well, think about the central elements of noir. A protagonist who's often compromised by circumstance, bleak urban settings, fatalistic themes, deep shadows.
Oh.
When you transplant that sensibility onto the plains, the setting changes, but the moral decay remains. In a film like Ramrod or Pitfall, the villain isn't just a cattle rustler. He's often an obsessed, morally compromised figure.
And the landscape itself feels different.
Totally. The stark, open landscape becomes less heroic and more lonely. It emphasizes the isolation and existential dread of the characters. He used light and shadow aggressively, even in the sun-drenched West, to highlight that psychological complexity.
That blending allowed him to elevate those B pictures into something critics and fans are still discussing today. And his writing wasn't just relegated to uncredited work, right? He did get a prestigious official acknowledgement for his storytelling.
He did, and this proved that his narrative ability was recognized at the highest level, even outside his directing assignments. In 1951, he received an Oscar nomination for Best Writing.
And this was a shared nomination with William Bowers for the original story that became the classic Western, The Gunfighter, starring Gregory Peck.
Yeah. So here's a man who aggressively fought the studio system for his independence, yet that same system recognized his fundamental talent for generating compelling narratives. It really confirms his standing as a master craftsman, regardless of the role he was filling on any given day.
It's a powerful validation of his versatility. He could be fighting the lawyers one year and walking the Academy red carpet the next.
And that versatility and recognition really set the stage for the next, arguably most famous chapter of his career.
Okay, let's make that transition now because here's where it gets really interesting. We need to confront the monumental physical contradiction that defines his fame. The House of Wax paradox.
It's the moment where his technical acumen just completely trumps his personal experience. House of Wax, 1953, stands as his most recognized directorial effort.
It wasn't just a hit.
No, it was the major studio success that solidified 3D as a commercial phenomenon, even if it was temporary, in the mid-50s.
And as we've established, the director of the definitive 3D film could not physically perceive 3D. How do you, as a director, orchestrate depth when you only see the world in 2 dimensions?
He had to rely entirely on the technical fundamentals, what we call monocular depth cues.
Okay.
A person with one eye processes depth by understanding things like relative size, closer objects look bigger, occlusion, one object blocking another, texture gradient, linear perspective.
Things a director learns anyway.
Exactly. A director is trained in these things anyway, but Toth had to strip away the feeling of depth and rely purely on the calculation of depth.
So when he staged a scene, he couldn't actually verify the impact of the illusion, like the moment the paddle ball seems to fly into the audience, or the wax figures loom over the viewer.
He couldn't. He had to trust his technical crew and his knowledge of composition.
Wow.
He had to rely on the camera setup, specifically the dual cameras required for stereoscopic filming. His direction had to be hyper-aware of the mathematics involved in separating the foreground, middle ground, and background planes to create a striking effect for the audience's 2 eyes.
So he would have worked very closely with his technical team.
He likely relied heavily on the stereographer and the technical operator to confirm the exact distance settings and convergence of the lenses.
What were some of the practical techniques he might have focused on to ensure the effect worked, even if he couldn't see it himself?
He would have emphasized extreme separation. Think about it. A lot of classic 3D involves things being thrust into the camera.
Right into your face.
Toth was masterful at ensuring there was a strong, often exaggerated foreground element, something very close to the lens, followed by a clear middle ground action and then a distinct background. This strong layering ensures that the brain has multiple cues to process depth, even when it's exaggerated by the 3D process.
So for him, it wasn't a gimmick to hide weak drama.
No, it was a technical requirement that demanded precise blocking and staging.
It's the ultimate testament to his professional rigor. He overcame a personal, physical limitation through sheer intellectual and technical mastery.
It proves he truly understood the mechanics of filmmaking, independent of the emotional input of his own sight. It makes him completely unique.
And while House of Wax gives him notoriety, we have to remember that his lasting artistic contribution lies in those atmospheric, often darker films that showcased his control over mood and tension.
Which brings us back to noir.
Exactly.
Right.
Despite the high-key spectacle of the 3D horror, he was a genuine master of shadow and moral ambiguity. Which specific noir titles from the sources really cemented his reputation?
2 stand out: Pitfall from 1948 and Crime Wave from 1954.
Tell me about Pitfall.
Pitfall is particularly noted for its psychological depth. It focuses on a man, a typical everyman, who falls into temptation and crime, and in doing so, destroys his conventional life.
And Crime Wave.
Crime Wave, on the other hand, is a taut, almost documentary-style piece of filmmaking that uses the real LA streets to create this sense of inescapable dread.
These films show a versatility that is just stunning when you contrast it with the broad strokes of 3D horror. He could handle the claustrophobic tension of a back alley conversation just as well as the broad spectacle of a burning wax museum.
The 1950s was really his decade of maximum output, and it was driven by that independence he fought so hard for. He was constantly working, churning out genre films at an impressive rate, especially westerns.
Just looking at the list from our sources confirms that dominance. Man in the Saddle, Carson City, Springfield Rifle, Last of the Comanches, The Bounty Hunter, The Indian Fighter, and Day of the Outlaw. That is a relentless schedule.
It is, and Day of the Outlaw is often cited as a masterpiece of the genre, a grim, snowbound psychological western that is just a culmination of his style of blending noir fatalism with the western format. He wasn't just an efficient director, he was a constantly evolving working director, a true craftsman.
That need for efficiency and adaptability would prove crucial as the American studio system started to crumble and the global film market opened up in the 1960s. So let's track that shift now, looking at his later career and those incredible hidden credits that reveal the true extent of his influence.
As the new decade arrived, like many directors of his era, Toth began looking overseas for production opportunities.
Which led to a shift back toward the European film industry.
Right. He focused largely on Italian productions, many of which were large-scale historical epics or adventure films, a genre often called peplum at the time.
The sources mention titles like Morgan the Pirate in 1960 and The Mongols in 1961. This shows him adapting immediately to the popular cinematic tastes of his new market.
He's moving from westerns and noir to swashbucklers and costume dramas. He was a chameleon, always finding a way to ply his trade.
But one film from the late 1960s, a war action film, is highly regarded and feels like a return to the gritty realism he knew best.
That would be Play Dirty from 1968, starring Michael Caine and Nigel Davenport.
Right.
It's a ruthless, cynical portrayal of a commando unit operating behind enemy lines in North Africa during World War II. It allowed him to channel some of that experience and realism he gathered during his earlier controversial wartime filming assignment, directing action and moral conflict in a brutal landscape.
Now, what's truly surprising about his later career isn't just the films he directed under his own name, but the immense contributions he made to major Hollywood productions where his name barely registered with the public. We're talking about uncredited blockbuster work.
This is where his reputation as a master technician just shines. Because he was so knowledgeable about every aspect of production editing, writing, staging complex action, he was hired as a second unit director on some of the biggest cinematic epics in history.
We should probably clarify for our listener, what does a second unit director do, and why is that role so vital on a massive production?
So second unit director is tasked with filming all the scenes that don't involve the main actors or critical dialogue. This includes establishing shots, massive crowd scenes, complex stunts, battle sequences, and landscape photography.
They handle the sheer logistical scale of the production.
Exactly. They free up the main director to focus on the performance and the character arcs. They're the trusted logistics and action specialists.
And Toth's resume in this area is, well, it's jaw-dropping.
It is. We see his significant, yet often uncredited, contributions on David Lean's monumental Lawrence of Arabia in 1962, a film famous for its breathtaking desert vistas and enormous action sequences.
Wow.
And then, jumping forward, he worked on Richard Donner's seminal Superman in 1978.
So the man who fought Columbia to maintain his independence and directed tight, low-budget westerns was also secretly running the desert unit for Lawrence of Arabia and orchestrating action sequences for the first major modern superhero film. That is an impossible professional tightrope walk.
And that is the central so what of this phase. It perfectly illustrates that his independence wasn't about rejecting the work, it was about rejecting the system of ownership.
Right.
He was willing to contribute his considerable skills wherever they were needed, regardless of the credit line or the budget size, whether it was a small B picture or a 1,000-person spectacle in the desert.
His focus remained purely on the craft, getting the most dramatic, impactful images on screen. He was an indispensable hired gun.
Proving his value through efficiency and technical brilliance, which allowed him to successfully navigate the industry entirely on his own terms. He was the ultimate professional filmmaker, valuing execution over the ego of the directorial credit.
This willingness to take on diverse, technically challenging roles allowed him to influence cinematic history in ways that the public barely recognized. But it solidified his reputation among his peers as a true master.
For sure.
Now that we've covered the professional side, we have to talk about the sheer, overwhelming drama of his personal life. Because Andre de Toth was clearly a character who lived life as intensely off-screen as he directed it on-screen. Let's look at the myth, the marriages, and the astonishing story of the eye patch.
His personal life was certainly prolific. The sources confirm he had 7 marriages in total throughout his long life.
7.
If you imagine the personal and professional complexity required to manage 7 different marriages, you begin to grasp the intense energy this man possessed.
And it wasn't just the number of spouses, it was the size of the family he built. He was father and stepfather to 19 children,
19.
including the film editor Nicholas Toth, who continues the family's legacy in the industry.
7 marriages and 19 children. That's truly remarkable. It suggests a man who embraced life, family, and passion with an unmatched ferocity. It's such a stark contrast to the disciplined, highly controlled approach he took to his filmmaking.
Of those 7 marriages, one stands out immediately due to the sheer wattage of his spouse's fame, actress Veronica Lake.
Absolutely. His most famous marriage was to Veronica Lake, the iconic 1940s star known globally for her dramatic, hair-covering, one-eye peekaboo hairstyle. They were married for 8 years, from 1944 until their divorce in 1952.
And they had 2 children together during that high-profile period, a son, Andre Anthony Michael Toth III, and a daughter, Diana Toth.
It's interesting that he married Veronica Lake right when his career was solidifying in Hollywood.
And then he married another actress, Mary Lou Holloway, in 1953. The same year, House of Wax became a massive success.
He was clearly a central figure in Hollywood's social fabric, not just its professional one. And at the time of his passing, he was married to his 7th wife, Anne Green. He never slowed down.
We are also fortunate that he provided some insight into this whirlwind life. He published his memoir in 1996, titled Fragments, Portraits from the Inside.
That title perfectly sums up his perspective. A life spent collecting fragmented experiences, always observing keenly, always independent. And his most famous visual marker, that piratical black eye patch, was key to one of the most incredible fragments of his life.
This anecdote, the eye patch incident, it reads like something ripped straight out of one of his own international espionage films. We have to dedicate some time to the details.
The setting is 1973. Toth was far from the Hollywood hills. He was scouting for film locations in Egypt, right in the immediate aftermath of the extremely tense Yom Kippur War.
So this is an exceptionally volatile environment, just rife with political hostility and lingering military presence.
To put it mildly, and Andre Toth, the one-eyed director, got caught up in this geopolitical nightmare.
Ow.
The sources recount that he was stopped, kidnapped, pistol-whipped, and subjected to a very rough interrogation by a group of young men operating under extreme tension. Their mistake was based entirely on his appearance. They were convinced they had captured a much higher value target.
They mistook the Hollywood director for the legendary Israeli military commander, Moshe Dayan.
Yes, Moshe Dayan, the iconic general, was one of the most instantly recognizable, high-profile figures in the entire Middle East conflict, due entirely to his own famous eye patch, which he wore over an eye lost in combat years earlier.
The resemblance, based purely on that one single visual element, must have been uncanny enough in the chaos of 1973 Egypt to trigger a deadly reaction.
It was deadly serious. He was facing certain execution. He was arguing desperately that he was an American filmmaker.
What saved him?
The only thing that saved him, according to the sources, was that the situation eventually required a physical examination, which verified his claim that he was not the Israeli commander and, crucially, that he was not Jewish.
To escape death through a verified identity check, under those circumstances, is almost unbelievable. It's the ultimate validation of his bizarre, adventurous life, where even his physical handicap became the cause of a high-stakes, dramatic survival story.
It adds that final layer of mythological intensity to a man who was already defined by extremes. He was a survivor not just of Hollywood lawsuits and B-movie budgets, but of genuine global conflicts.
Andre Toth continued his dynamic life, living in the way he always had, until he passed away on October 27, 2002 at the age of 89. He died from an aneurysm in Burbank, California, and was interred in Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills.
A life lived fully, ending in the place he constantly sought to define and yet constantly sought to remain independent from.
So let's quickly consolidate the astonishing narrative arc of Andre Toth. He went from a high-achieving law student with aristocratic heritage to a celebrated Hungarian playwright under Ferenc Molnar.
Navigated the treacherous waters of wartime Europe, briefly filming the Nazi invasion of Poland, worked under Alexander Korda.
And then became an Oscar-nominated writer and a tireless independent Hollywood director.
And we must emphasize that he was a director who defined the gritty, atmospheric style of the noir Western, excelling in films like Day of the Outlaw and Pitfall.
Right. And all of this was overshadowed by the grand irony of his career. Being the one-eyed, technical genius behind House of Wax, the most successful 3D film of its time.
A spectacle he literally could not appreciate.
He then shifted continents, mastering the European epic, before returning to serve as the uncredited, indispensable second-unit director on Hollywood monuments like Lawrence of Arabia and Superman. His life was just a constant stream of contradiction.
The aristocrat who hated the system, the lawyer who loved the stage, the one-eyed man who mastered depth.
And that is the synthesis of his legacy. Contradiction held together by an iron will for independence and an unwavering commitment to the fundamentals of filmmaking. What does it tell us about the art form itself?
It tells us that a director's technical limitation, a low budget, or the lack of a major studio contract, none of these things stopped him from delivering cinema that was compelling, impactful, and technically masterful. He saw limitations as a framework for demanding excellence.
He spent his entire adult life operating either on the fringe or actively fighting the traditional system, as we saw with his landmark decision to sue Columbia early on.
Right.
Yet in his later career, he was crucial to the execution of some of the most mainstream high-budget epics ever produced.
This dual existence is incredibly revealing. You have the celebrated auteur, the director of small, gritty, influential films revered by cinephiles, and simultaneously, you have the hidden logistical master, the man trusted to deliver the breathtaking scale and complex action of films like Lawrence of Arabia.
His name wasn't on the marquee for that work, but the drama was certainly on the screen.
It absolutely was.
So this is the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. Considering André de Toth's career, where he achieved fame for a technical trick he couldn't see, and achieved lasting influence through uncredited work on the biggest blockbusters. What does this say about how we truly define success and measure a director's legacy in Hollywood?
Yeah.
Is it ultimately about the name on the poster, or is the true measure of a master filmmaker found in the undeniable presence of the drama and technical perfection they managed to put on screen, regardless of whose ultimate vision the final product served?
A question that forces us to look beyond the credit roll and into the frame itself. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary life and paradoxical career of André de Toth.
We'll see you next time.